Well, good afternoon and welcome back to session 3 of Bible Stories for Adults, the Old Testament. And I just have to say, last week, after Eve made her, her presentation, we had a really good discussion, engaging with all of you. And it'd be fun to do that again today, and that'll add a lot
We
to
have
the
time.
Yeah, sure. He was going to be talking to us today about the book of Daniel and the stories that run through the book. And with that, I'll let you begin. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's good to see you. This Daniel's book Daniel talks about resistance to assimilation. And there were two kinds of and there are modern okay, the book of Daniel deals with the issue of assimilation. Can you hear? Yes. Okay. Which is an issue for people who belong to the non-majority group. As a Mennonite, and the Mennonites are dealing with that, I experienced the push and pull on assimilation. The dominant culture is attractive. The youth want to be part of it, and you have to work at staying separate. And there are cultural ways to do that, like not working on the Sabbath, eating special food or not eating special food. And assimilation was a problem for the people in the story of Daniel. Daniel was the last Old Testament book to be written. It's put in the section of writings in the Hebrew Bible. The Old Testament puts it among the prophets, but Daniel was not a prophet. He was a wise man and a seer who had the ability to interpret dreams. And the story is about the persecution that the Jews were suffering under the ruler Antiochus Epiphanes. Now, at the death of Alexander the Great, his empire was divided among his generals, and one of the empires included Judea. Now, the Greek Empire was different from the previous empires that the Jews had experienced. Mostly, they just wanted to suck the money out by collecting tribute, and they didn't much care what else went on. But the Greek Empire attempted to destroy the religion and culture in the countries that they conquered and replace it with the Greek Hellenistic culture. We've seen examples of this in the modern world. Dominant empire comes in, conquers some territory, and totally disrespects the native people and their ways. Now, the ruler of Judea was named Antiochus Epiphanes, and he outlawed all the Jewish religious rites and traditions, and he turned the temple of Jerusalem into a worship of Zeus. And in order to show his disrespect for the Jewish religion, he had a pig sacrificed on the altar in the temple, which is about the worst thing that could have happened. And he poured out the lamp that burned continuously in the temple. And he forced the high priest and others to eat pig meat. This triggered two responses: a violent response and a nonviolent response that were going on at the same time. You may be familiar with a violent response. It was the revolt of the Maccabees, which led successfully to a brief period of independence. And it also led to the writing of the book of Daniel, which was a nonviolent response. Now, the first 6 chapters of Daniel are stories, made up stories, to describe what was going on, how to resist. And they're entertaining stories of how to defy a powerful empire. The second part of Daniel is apocalyptic. It's Daniel's visions of the future, the 4 beasts, the time of I can't read my own handwriting. He has visions about what the future would hold. And many people have read this second part of Daniel and attempted to read it about their own times. My own grandfather actually wrote a book about Daniel, not the fun part of the stories, but he was trying to figure out what's going on. And I he died when I was a child. I never got to say, really give it up. There's no point. But he was part of the great interest in trying to understand the future through that. But the first story is the story of Daniel and his friends at the court of Nebuchadnezzar. Now, Babylon and Nebuchadnezzar are used in the book of Daniel, much as they are used in Revelation. Babylon is like Nazis in our, if you see a cartoon Nazi, you know, these are the bad guys. And the Babylonians were the bad guys. They're the bad guys in Revelation, which is actually set in during the Roman Empire, and in Daniel during the Greek Empire. But in the first story, Daniel and his friends are at the court of Nebuchadnezzar in Babylon. They were captives, noble young men who were brought to the court of Nebuchadnezzar and prepared to serve at court. And the first way they were prepared was that they were brought food from the royal table. And they said, we can't eat this. We're going to we just want to eat vegetables. A nonviolent way to resist. And the steward in charge was somewhat suspicious, but said, okay, you can just have your vegetables. And they were perfectly healthy afterward. But the defiance got greater and greater. Now, Daniel had the ability to interpret dreams, and the people at the court learned about that. And Nebuchadnezzar had a dream, and none of his wise men at court could help him, and he was very disturbed. And Daniel was known as someone who could interpret dreams. So he asked that time be given to him to tell the meaning to the king. He asked his friends to pray, and the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a night vision. Oh, I forgot to mention that Daniel and his friends had their names changed by the people who had captured them. And his friends had Jewish names, but they were renamed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And anyway, he asked for time to pray, and then the mystery was revealed to him in a night vision. So he came into the king and said, "You, king, saw a huge statue. The statue was great, and its brilliance was abundant. It was standing before you, and its appearance was fearsome. That statue's head was gold. Its chest and arms were silver, as its loins and its thighs were bronze. Its legs were iron, and its feet part iron and part clay. You were watching, excuse me, you were watching until a stone hewn not by hands, not by human hands, came and struck the statue on its feet of iron and clay and shattered them. That's where we get the phrase, feet of clay. Then altogether the iron, clay, bronze, silver, and gold were shattered and became like chaff from the summer threshing floor, and no place was found for them. Then the stone that struck the statue became a great mountain and filled all the earth. This is a dream, O king, and its meaning. And we shall say, you king, even king of kings, to whom God, the God of heavens, has given power and might and honor, you are the head of gold, and after you shall arise another kingdom inferior to yours, and a third kingdom of bronze that shall rule over all the earth, and a fourth kingdom shall be strong as iron, because iron shatters and splinters all things. And like smashing iron, all these shall shatter and smash. And as to the feet and the toes you saw, part potter's clay and part iron, the kingdom shall be split, and it shall have the strength of iron. You saw iron mixed with clay from the soil. They shall be mixed with human seed and shall not hold together, just as iron does not mix with clay. And in the days of these things, the God of the heavens shall establish a kingdom that shall never be destroyed. To another person it shall not be abandoned. It shall shatter and put an end to all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. Because you have seen that from a mountain a stone was hewn not by hands. And smashed the iron, bronze, clay, silver, and gold. The great God has made known to the king what will be after this, and the dream is true, its meaning certain. Then did King Nebuchadnezzar fall on his face, and he bowed down to Daniel, and he said to offer him grain offering and incense. The king said to Daniel, in truth, because your God is the God of gods and master of kings and revealer of mysteries, you were able to reveal this mystery. Then did the king make Daniel great, and he gave him many gifts and caused him to rule over the province of Babylonia and made him chief governor over all the sages of Babylonia. And we see Daniel's fortunes rise and fall. The next story is a story of the golden image and the fiery furnace. Nebuchadnezzar made a statue of gold, 60 cubits high and 6 cubits wide. Somebody tried to draw a picture of that, and it's very long and thin, very strange looking statue. He set it up in the Dura Valley in the province of Babylonia. And Nebuchadnezzar sent out orders to assemble the satraps, the governors and officials, the counselors, the treasurers, the judges, the commanders of the camps, and all the administration of the province to come for the dedication of the statue that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Then did the satraps, the governors and officials, the counselors, the judges, the commanders of the camps, and the administrators of the provinces assemble, and the dedication of the statue that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. I find these repetitions comical. I think they're deliberately comical the writer of Daniel is making fun of the arrangements that Nebuchadnezzar had gone to. It's a great weapon against an enemy. It just sort of belittle him by making all this look silly. And the heralds called out loudly, "To you it is said, people, nations, and tongues, when you hear the sound of the horn, the pipe, the lute, the zither, the lyre, the flute, all kinds of music, you shall fall down and worship the gold statue that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. And whoever does not fall down at once shall be cast into the furnace of blazing fire." Therefore, then they would hear the sound of the horn, the pipe, the lute, the zither, the lyre, the flute, and all kinds of music. The people, nations, and tongues would immediately worship the gold statue that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. At this time, Chaldean men came forward and denounced the Jews. They spoke out and said to King Nebuchadnezzar, "O king, may you live forever. You, king, put out a decree that any man who heard the sound of the horn, the pipe, the lute, the zither, the lyre, the flute, and all kinds of music must fall down and worship the gold statue. And whoever did not fall down and worship would be cast into the furnace of blazing fire. There are certain Jews whom you appointed over the work of the province of Babylonia, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They have paid no heed to you, O king. They do not serve your God, and they do not worship the gold statue that you set up." Then did Nebuchadnezzar say in angry and fury to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And then were these men brought before the king. Nebuchadnezzar said to them, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you are not serving my God and are not worshiping the gold statue that I put up? Now, if you are ready, when you hear the sound of the horn, the pipe, the lute, the zither, the lyre and the flute, and all kinds of music, and you worship the statue that I have made, all will be well. And if you do not worship, you will immediately be thrown into the furnace of blazing fire. And who is a God who can save you from my hands?" Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego said to King Nebuchadnezzar, "We do not need to answer you about this matter." I love this next part. "If our God, whom we serve, is able to save us from the furnace of blazing fire and from your hand, O king, he shall save us. And if not, let it be known to you, O king, that we will not serve your God, and we will not worship the golden statue that you have set up." Then was Nebuchadnezzar filled with wrath, and the look of his face burned because of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He said to stoke the furnace 7 times hotter than it was used to being stoked. And to the warriors of his army, he ordered to hand Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and to throw them into the furnace of blazing fire. Then these men were bound in their trousers, their tunics, their headgear, and their garments, and thrown into the furnace of blazing fire. Therefore, because the king's word was severe, the furnace was intensely stoked. And these men who had brought up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego did the fire flames kill. And then these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, were bound into the furnace of blazing fire. Then was King Nebuchadnezzar astounded and arose in haste. He said to his counselors, "Did we not throw those men bound into the fire?" They answered, "Indeed, king." He said, "I see 4 men walking unbound within the fire, and there is no hurt in them. And the appearance of the 4th is like a divine being." Then Nebuchadnezzar approached the gate of the furnace of blazing fire. He said, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out from within the fire. And the satraps, governors, and the king's officials and the king's counselors were assembled and saw these men, that the fire had no power over their bodies, and the hair of their heads was not singed, and their trousers were in no way different, and the smell of the fire had not touched them. Nebuchadnezzar said, Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his messenger and saved his servants who trusted in him, and defied the king's word and submitted their bodies, for they would not serve nor worship any God except their God. And he sent out a decree that any people, nation, or tongue that speaks ill of the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut to pieces, and their houses shall be burned, turned into a dung heap, for there is no other God that can rescue like this. Then the king exalted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylonia. King Nebuchadnezzar, to all his people, nations, and tongues that dwell on all the earth, may your well-being abound. The signs and wonders that the Most High God had performed with me, it pleases me to tell how great they are, and his wonders how powerful. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and his dominion for all generations. Nice story. The next story has a section may be familiar to you. King Belshazzar made a great feast for 1,000 of his nobles, and before the 1,000 he drank wine. With wine on his tongue, Belshazzar said to his servants, Bring in the vessels of gold and silver that Nebuchadnezzar, my father, had taken away from the temple in Jerusalem. So the king and his nobles, his wives, and his concubines might drink from them. Then they brought the vessels of gold that had been taken away from the temple of the house of God in Jerusalem. And the king, his nobles, his wives, and his concubines drank from them. They drank the wine and praised the gods of gold and silver, bronze, iron, wood, and stone. At the very moment, the fingers of a man's hand came out and wrote on the plaster of the wall of the king's palace. And the king saw the palm of the hand that was writing. Then the king's countenance changed, and his thoughts panicked him. And the cords of his loins went slack, and his knees knocked together. The king called out loudly to bring in his magicians and fortune tellers. The king said to the wise men of Babylon, Whoever reads this writing and tells me what it means shall wear royal purple and have a golden collar around his neck and rule over 1/3 of the kingdom. Then the king's wise men came in, but they could not read the writing nor interpret the meaning. Then King Belshazzar panicked, and the queen came in and said, Don't panic. There's a man in your kingdom in whose body is the spirit of his holy God. And in your father's time, the wisdom of the gods was found in him. And King Nebuchadnezzar, your father, raised him up as a master of the wise men. Now let Daniel be called, and he will tell us its meaning. Then Daniel was called, and he read the writing and told the king its meaning. The writing is a message to you because you have exalted yourself against the God of the heavens. Many, many tekel upharsin, weighed, waiting, broken. I used to do a silly thing. I used to go and write on blackboards, many, many tekel upharsin. I thought that was funny. Don't know if anyone ever knew what it was. You have been weighed and found wanting, and your kingdom has been broken apart and given to the Medes and the Persians. Then they clothed Daniel in royal purple and put a golden collar around his neck and proclaimed that he would rule over 1/3 of the kingdom. On that very night, Belshazzar, king of the Chaldeans, was killed, and Darius the Mede received the kingdom. And the last of the stories is very familiar. Daniel in the lion's den. Oh, you're putting up the pictures. Oh, yes, they're up there. Very familiar. Officials of Babylon were jealous of Daniel, and one of them told King Darius that overseers of the kingdom, the governors and the satraps and counselors, had issued a royal vow to enforce an edict for 30 days that no one was to petition anybody except the king. This was a trap to catch Daniel, who prayed 3 times a day with the window open, and he was found guilty. They told the king, who reminded them that the laws of the Medes and Persians could never be changed. Daniel was then thrown into a lion's den, but God sealed the mouth of the lions. So that's the end of those stories. Yes. Now, your responses. Are you familiar with those stories from your childhood? And what is the, they're charming ways to describe the power of God in ways that we remember. The rest of the book is this puzzle about what's going to happen in the future. Yes, there are the pictures. I mean, you can go home now, or we can talk about this.
I didn't hear at the end. Did the book say that Daniel didn't get eaten by the lions, though, right?
No, God shut the mouth of the lion.
Yeah.
He was protected.
Narrow escape. Are you going to get into the 7 through 12? You're not going to talk about
Apocalyptic. It doesn't make a lot of sense. It's
Is it like a doomsday?
There are no. It's visions of beasts and so on. It's something to decipher about what's going to come next in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, the pictures are there, but these fantastical beasts are described. There's something like that in Revelation, which is inspired by Daniel.
What do scholars say about that relative to, you mentioned the link over to Revelations. How do they deal with that?
Well, Revelation is inspired by Daniel, and it was a very similar period.
Mm-hmm.
The Christians were being oppressed by the Romans the way the Jews were being oppressed by the Greeks. Mm-hmm. So you put your messages in messages in code, so your enemy doesn't know what you're saying, but the people who understand know. So the message went out in code. The Revelation is set, as you may remember, in Babylon with the wicked Nebuchadnezzar, the wicked Babylonians. Babylon is monster. It's a way of encouraging people in times of stress. And the stories in Daniel are to encourage people to defy the empire. It's a nonviolent response in contrast to the violent response of the Maccabees. Two responses at the same. There were two responses to the oppression of the Greek Empire, and one of them was the Maccabees, and at the same time as the Maccabee military revolt was the nonviolent response described in the book of Daniel. This is sort of a handbook of how to act, not passively, but non-violently. You can refuse to eat the food. You can refuse to participate in the life of the empire. You can make fun, as the stories do, with those silly lists and absurd things that they're doing. And like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, you can refuse to bow down. You can refuse to honor. You can refuse to stand for the flag and the anthem. So it's a handbook of refusal to empire, which I find very inspiring, because considering we live in the shadow of an empire.
Yeah. Who wrote the book of Daniel?
Who wrote anything? I don't,
Is it just
I don't know that.
Are there stories that maybe were initially just passed on verbally and then?
I don't know offhand. It's people with a sense of humor, definitely, because a lot of it is funny. Does somebody know? Oh, Rick.
Yeah.
Richard.
Thanks. So you're saying that this was written around the time of the Maccabees, which is somewhere around the first century
Second century
BCE.
BC. Yeah.
Yeah, and the Babylonian Empire, under which oversaw the Jewish refugees, what took place around the 5th century.
Well, it's of course
Yeah.
that's a way to talk about it without seeming to be talking about the current situation.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think that having a book in the Bible that was written sort of 5 centuries after the events that occurred sort of indicates that this is not a true story or a set of stories, but it is the biblical truth that you talked about in the first session.
It's true, but not historical.
Yeah.
It's poetic truth, right?
Yeah.
So,
but could you comment on why the Babylonian era was chosen as a basis for this book?
Oh, why was Babylon in both the Old Testament and the New, the code stand in for the worst? Well, they had been carried away by the Babylonians. I mean, the Babylonians were responsible for the exile. I mean, they're really bad guys.
So they could stand as the bad guys, whoever it happened to be at the time.
They destroyed the temple. They destroyed Jerusalem. I mean, you don't get badder than that. Good
Richard?
questions.
Question. I had a question there on that at least 3 of the stories seem to speak directly to the situation under Antiochus
Right.
Epiphanes, so that the statue that had to be worshipped is Zeus in the temple.
Yes, yes, thank you.
The holding on to the dietary laws is because it was not only being officially Jewish customs were frowned on, but I think a lot of the people who lived in Jerusalem found the Hellenistic situation very attractive.
Oh, yeah, there were people who were happy to cooperate with the empire.
They wanted to eat anything, and they wanted to go to the gymnasium and all those things that were Hellenistic. And there's another story there with I guess Daniel himself in the lion's den, that he has prayed to Yahweh from where you're told no petitions to anybody but the king. the king is the only one. Don't forget about your local gods and whatnot. But then my question is, the two dreams, the one especially with all of those, the head of gold and the neck of silver or whatever it was, and the chest of bronze and the so on, that I think that is understood to represent some kind of an example of the different kingdoms.
Mhm.
How does that work? I just wanted to throw that to you. That's an honest question.
I'm not sure. The feet of clay, the current kingdom, I don't think I know. Anyone?
Richard, are you are you saying that Daniel, the stories were also a message to the Jewish people um, about their behavior and if Daniel defied, they should defy. Now the question of that image, that's the stone, the iron, do you think there might be deeper symbolic meaning to the statue itself? Does it represent the state in some way? About the statue itself?
Oh, my gosh. No, 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 it's just, well, you, O king, are the gold head. I mean, he flatters the king. So he can still have audiences with him. Yeah, I'm not sure how to handle that. It's obviously, the kingdom is not firmly established. Yes, it's got feet of clay. But in your time, it'll last, but it's destined to fall. Yes, it's no kingdom is eternal.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that term, feet of clay, is still in
Yeah.
our vocabulary
Yeah,
today,
absolutely.
representing something that may seem to be stable, but there could be trouble.
Well, there are phrases like the writing on the wall. And where did that come? Well, this is where it came from. Right.
Mm.
Yes.
Anything else? Yes.
I guess I'm confused. The Maccabees, I thought the Maccabees were also involved in Roman times with the destruction of the temple and the revolt against the Romans in 70, I think it was in 70 AD.
No, the
Yeah.
Maccabees were that.
Okay, I just thought that's why they celebrate Hanukkah. And
Yeah, we've got a historian here who knows the dates.
The Festival of Lights is celebrating the cleansing of the temple in 135 BC, I think, which is the end of the whole Maccabean era, when John Hyrcanus, am I right on that? The high priest has triumphed, and he's somehow out of that Maccabean group. A number of them had been killed, and it was a long period of wars. And it's been a very long time since I have looked at either of those books of Maccabees, but they have letters in them. And toward the very, very end, they are actually negotiating with the Romans that if you would support us and so on, and, so it's it probably is a more accurately a historical book, whereas Daniel, which as Eva said, is a non-violent approach, is using really imaginary stories as a way of telling you that, you know, this is the way it should be. So they're in parallel, but that's the best I could do.
We work together very well.
Yeah, the Maccabees were revolted against the Greek Syrians who were controlling the area at that time, and Rome basically took over. So that's part of the confusion about the time period. By 70 AD, Rome was totally in control. Also, the Maccabees were basically Jewish fundamentalists and militant, and were opposed in many ways by Jewish secularists, or Israelite secularists. At that point, the secularists were those who were very attracted to the Greek culture.
Right.
But I was wondering if you could identify any difference between the Jewish Bible and the Old Testament in terms of the treatment of the book of Daniel and its significance.
Would that have to do with where it's placed, Rick? Yeah,
Well, the Old Testament moves, I did a whole session on this, moves the Hebrew Bible books out of order, making a mess of it, actually. Putting Daniel with the prophets, which it's not. Putting Ruth, messing up the movement from Judges to Samuel. So the Jewish arrangement is the proper arrangement, but the the people who put together the final order of the Christian Bible, Old Testament, I don't know what year that was, it's pretty late, had no respect for the Jewish Bible. You know, they were supersessionist. But the Jewish Bible order makes great, it's much more logical. It's much more aware of the genre. And the Christian Old Testament labors on the illusion that this is all historical, and they're trying to put them in historical order, like Ruth. Ruth is just a story. Actually, Ruth is a story written against Ezra. It's very late. I mean, there's this story about this young foreign woman who became the grandmother of David. But it's written against Ezra's teaching that when they came back from exile, the problem was they were mixing their religion with foreigners, and many of them had married foreign wives. So he ordered them to send their foreign wives away, which was cruel. And the response to that was the Book of Ruth. There's a lot of conversation between different books. You know, there's no such thing as the Bible says. You know, it's a collection of books, and they say different things. I mean, the prophet Nahum says, annihilate the Assyrians. The story of Jonah says, go to Assyria and preach to them, because God loves them. You know, there's no, you know, there's dialogue and conversation going on all the time.
so you can always find something that suits your purpose, right?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Well, this is, yeah, good.
I hope I'm not needling in the speaker too much. The putting Daniel among the prophets then turns the whole, which is essentially a Christian idea, that the prophets are fortune tellers about the future.
Yes.
Because some of the Daniel stories and the apocalyptic myths are telling you what's going to happen in the future,
Yeah, it's very
which is a total misunderstanding of what prophets are all about.
I mean, the Jews have their problems, but I get really annoyed at the Christians when they
Right.
mess up. Yes. Are there any response from the Zoom people? Oh,
No. Well, okay. Next week, I think you're going to be talking about the poetic,
right. The next session is on how the poetry works. It doesn't rhyme, it has rhythm. And it's not just in the Psalms, it's all over the place. Well, the prophets speak, it's intense language, so you find it in the prophetic parts. And then the last session is sort of gathering up everything we didn't look at, like the Song of Songs, you know, the erotic poetry. And there's terrific stuff in the Bible, and a great variety of expressions of the human experience.
and you'll be delving into Psalms next week as well then, I'm
Well,
sure.
the Psalms are the first thing we may think of in poetry, but there's poetry in the prophets who were speaking intensely fell into poetry most of the time. And it's scattered around everywhere. And how the poetry works. It has rhythm, but it doesn't have rhyme. It's intense language. And I'll try to explain how it becomes intense.
And maybe we can talk then about how that poetry translated, because, it made it into English, and the other translations. Do you think the true nature? Well, we'll talk about that next
Well,
week.
I've talked about translations and recommended Robert Alter's translations.
Yeah, well,
And some of them are there's translations to the target language, trying to make it easy, and then focusing on where it's coming from. And all translations make compromises because you cannot make a perfect
Right.
translation because the whole world view is different. Right. Yeah, fascinating question.
well, okay, we'll look forward to that next week. Thank you.